I think it's just going to get weirder and weirder and weirder, and finally it's going to be so weird that people are going to have to talk about how weird it is. Eventually people are going to say, what the hell is going on? It's not enough to say it's nuts. You have to explain why it's so nuts. The invention of artificial life, the cloning of human beings, possible contact with extraterrestrials, the systems which are in place to keep the world sane are utterly inadequate to the forces that have been unleashed.
Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today my guest is Trey Hudson. Be sure to check out my films. Doors of Perception is on Amazon Prime, Occult Louisiana is on Tubi, Roku Channel, Apple, and many more. Booking guests for January. If you have suggestions or you'd like to be a guest, email me, forbiddenknowledgenews@gmail.com. Visit our website, forbiddenknowledge.news. It's the home of the Forbidden Knowledge Network. We feature some of your favorite podcasts and content creators. Today I want to welcome back to the show Trey Hudson. He is the director of the Oxford Paranormal Society and its Anomalous Studies and Observation Group. He is an Eagle Scout and former Army intelligence officer. He has a psychology degree from the University of West Georgia and a 30-plus year career as a U.S. government security specialist specializing in security of sensitive assets, anti-terrorism, security of WMD, emergency management, and other specialties. Trey, welcome back. How you doing?
I'm doing great, man. Doing great. Living the dream every single day.
I can see that, man. You've been very busy since we last spoke. First, I wanted to thank you again for being a part of my film, Doors of Perception, available on Amazon Prime. Thank you so much. You did a great service to that. And now you have a new documentary, The Meadow Project, which you produced with our friend Tony Merkel. You also have a short documentary, Helm and Lens. I'm really looking forward to sharing these with the audience and hearing about some of your new recent research from the Meadow. There's a lot we can get to here. Before we do, remind the audience just a little bit about yourself and let them know how they can find out more.
Yeah, what I tell people is basically I'm a regular guy, but I've just had some extraordinary opportunities in my life. I was an Army intelligence officer, got injured early in my career, cycled over to the civilian side with the Department of the Army, and basically jumped right into the intelligence side of that. And continued with a 34-year career, retired as a chief of intelligence and security management at one of our Department of Defense's organic industrial bases. But I've always been a student of the strange, the unusual, the weird. And I guess that was, kind of a little maladaptive, 10-year-old sponge sitting in front of the TV watching In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy and, all of those amazing stories and mysteries. And so, as I became an adult, I went to the University of West Georgia, studied under people like the famous parapsychologist, Dr. William Bill Roll, and I just have a natural interest in this stuff. And I started off kind of as a ghost guy, as a lot of us do. And then I started realizing that all of this stuff is interrelated. I can't, partition ghost stuff and Bigfoot stuff and UFO stuff. It's all related. So I went on a quest to really expand my horizons. I became a MUFON field investigator, which I still am. I've worked with and studied under, some of the better known cryptozoologists. I just did a week-long expedition up and land between the lakes with Adam Davies and Martin Groves. Two big names there. A lot of laughing and it's silliness around the campfire, but a lot of serious work too. And of course, my own work with the Meadow Project, which is an area of high strangeness that the man who wrote the book on Skinwalker Ranch, Ryan Skinner, says, in his opinion, parallels and equals the famous Skinwalker Ranch.
Right on. I think that'd be a great place to start, is just to give the audience a reminder about what you're doing out at the Meadow. I know you can't give out specific locations or anything. It's in the southern United States, but tell us what you can about the project in general.
It started off as a kind of a cryptozoological project. I was working with Bob Wilson, who some of your viewers might remember from the TV show Bigfoot is Real, known as Grumpy. God rest his soul. But we started off as a kind of a cryptid outing, and he had an amazing UFO experience back at base camp. Like a really significant UFO experience. And so he thought, okay, well, let's kind of focus around base camp and not, venture too far off because one of his teammates and myself were about 20 miles off in another part of this huge nature preserve that we research at. And so we found probably about a half a mile on foot, from base camp, this large meadow. And it was about an 8-acre meadow. And we figured we could set teams up around the periphery with night vision and thermal. We also it made a large, nice track trap, where you could see something walking across that would leave, footprints. Had a ridge to the south that we could put teams up, like could look down from a high vantage point, high ground, and also had a large expanse of open sky. So logistically, it just really made a lot of sense. This place would be a good place to set up and research and kind of see what we could find. And we were not prepared even remotely for what we found. And this kind of becomes a theme, as the Meadow Project evolves and matures, is it's continuously throwing us these wild curveballs that we're not expecting. So our first real outing, in the meadow, we had missing time. We had an individual witnessed by two individuals turn into an orb of energy and move, about 100 meters. We had green orbs hovering over base camp, and that was the first time. And it just got stranger and stranger from there. Of course, probably the big apex that everybody's heard about is the portal.
Mm-hmm.
And that video is in the film,
Yeah.
the new film, and along with the attempt to reconstruct it, which we were not able to do. So that's kind of the stuff we've been doing, and the phenomena. And I strongly believe that the phenomena is not just occurrences. I think it's tied to a non-human intelligence, an NHI, that we have been able to, in my opinion, communicate with using the Estes method that's also in the film. And it's interacted with us in very strange ways, like dream speak, physical interaction, actually tugging on us. And now it appears that it's following us to other places of high strangeness and having very strange interactions with some of our team members where they have entered something that they described as the upside down. And it was so disorientating to this team member. The question was asked when the response team got to him, are we real?
Whoa.
Are we real? Are you real? Because they were so disoriented.
That is crazy. There's a lot to get
Yeah.
to here. I took some notes as you were talking just now, but before we get to any of that new stuff, you mentioned the portal, which was basically a manifestation of this black cube out in the meadow that
Right.
your team members essentially stepped into and kind of disappeared and then reappeared later. If anyone wants that full story, I highly recommend going watch the film right now. But I'd like to know, do you have any updates to that? Is there any new information that you found out about it? Any new research?
Yeah. I did a lot of research into specifically black cubes, and I've got my second book out now, which is Return to the Meadow, and it can be found on Amazon. And I really started looking at cubes, okay? And I've reached out and have talked to other people, and one of my favorite researchers out there is Katie Page, who, she did the Colorado Ranch, and actually she was kind enough to actually take me to the Colorado Ranch, so I've actually been on that piece of property. And so she got me really intrigued with the cubes. So I started digging into that and going all the way back to, early history. Is the cube has always been a shape that has had some sort of mystical, esoteric significance. Is you go back and you read in the Old Testament, the tabernacle, which was the original tent-like structure that was carried by the Israelites as they moved through the desert. The place where they had the ark was like a box. It was a tent, but it was cubicle shaped. And then when King Solomon built the first temple, the Holy of Holies, the Sanctum Sanctorum, was a perfect cube. And inside of that cube was the ark, which they believed was a manifestation of
Mm.
God. Uh, and you could only approach that being, I think twice a year or once a year. You had to be prepared spiritually. You had to be cleansed because you were entering into another existence, another realm. Okay. You were entering into the realm of God. We can shift gears and go over to Islam. And in
Yes.
Mecca, they have something called the Kaaba,
Mm.
okay, which is a large black cube. That cube was actually used for polytheistic worship prior to Islam becoming the predominant religion of Saudi Arabia. So the Kaaba was significant even to polytheistic people, and it's interesting to note as in the corner of the Kaaba there is a space rock
Yes.
which is believed to be a meteorite. That part of the Hajj is, you are supposed to go by and rub that rock or rub the enclosure where that rock is as they work their way
Mm.
around this large black cube. Let's jump into the New Testament. When St. John the Revelator uh, said that he was given the visions of the future of Revelation, the New Jerusalem would descend from the sky. And what did the New Jerusalem look like? It was a crystalline cube, 1,400 miles on each side. Once again, a cube. Move into the Middle Ages and alchemy, there was something called the prima materia, which was the prime material of all matter. How did the alchemists represent the prima materia? Once again, a black
Yeah.
cube was the alchemical uh, sacred shape of the prime material. Became so important in archetypes that on the shore of the lake that Carl Jung had his cottage, he had erected for some strange reason a black
Uh,
cube. And then we can go back into more modern sightings of black cubes. Of course, the cube sighting at Skinwalker Ranch, the Chupa Chupas in Brazil, which would shoot incapacitating
wow.
rays, the cube sightings at the Colorado Ranch with Katie Page, cube sightings at Skinwalker Ranch, cube sightings you're now hearing about from the Navy and others
Mm.
as the UAP disclosure thing goes along. So there's something about the cubes. Now, I'm going to tell you, I don't have the answer. And I don't even know if I'm asking the right questions, but there's something special about these cubes.
That is so fascinating. Something else I thought of in some sects of Judaism, the headpieces they wear have the little black cube on it as well.
Which has a sacred
Mm.
text on a scroll inside of it. Yes.
So interesting, man. One more thing I'd like to get any updates, if you have any, is with the monkey bear lady. I remember you told us about the monkey
Ah,
bear lady. You did
yeah,
tell us that you found out a little bit more about her last time you were on,
yeah,
that she went to the same university as you, but anything else,
yeah,
anything
yeah.
new?
Actually, in my new book, I have a whole chapter on the
Oh,
monkey bear
great.
lady. And it turns out that, and this is kind of a weird, bit of synchronicity, is I got in contact with a psychotherapist in Istanbul, Turkey, of all places, who is an American that went to the same university, University of West
Yeah.
Georgia, and he knows the monkey bear lady. So they corresponded, and the monkey bear lady actually reached out to me. So I have communicated with her. She is a real person, she's a real flesh and blood person, and her account is that she was driving through the forest and she drove by our campsite and saw like a Bigfoot sticker or something on somebody's vehicle and thought she would come back later and tell us about the monkey bears. Now, take that for what it's worth. She came back at 10:30 at night, you know,
Yeah.
dressed in business attire. She said she was driving through the forest to unwind after a stressful day. So 10:30 at night in business attire in February in an area so remote there's not even cell phone coverage. She drives into a strange camp of people she doesn't know and proceeds to tell us about the monkey
Mm.
bears. And when, I asked her about the squatting down and urinating in front of everybody, she said, well, when you got to go, you got to go. It's, so, and she says she was not under the control of anything. She was not under the influence of any outside, entity or force. And I kind of leave the chapter with a big question mark. I don't know. When I lay all of these cards out on the table and I look at it, and if I had to categorize this, if it was a binary thing, is this a normal occurrence or an abnormal occurrence? I would have to look at the cards and say it's an abnormal
Yeah.
occurrence. Now, what is the reason of that? What's the cause and what's the significance? I don't know. And even my friend in Istanbul, he says, it seems off to me. And in his book, My Cosmic Trigger, he talks about the monkey bear lady and his interaction with her and my interaction with her, and kind of he's kind of scratching his head too. That's
Matt Vaughn,
Matt
yes, I've
Vaughn.
had him on a couple of times recently.
Oh yeah,
He
oh
brought
yeah,
up an interesting point about that associated with a lot of high strangeness naturally seems to come synchronicity. These events that fit together, these occurrences that seem to be linked to the experiences. You have synchronicity in your everyday life. Somebody will call whenever you
oh
think about it, or a song will come on. Something like that is your normal synchronicity, but this seems to be at times hypercharged with high
oh
strangeness
yeah,
events where things like the monkey
yes.
bear lady might occur.
Well, and it's kind of funny because that's, once Matt and I started communicating, I mean, it's like we ended up with a whole basket of synchronicities by the time, we kind of got into this. It's like, we went to the same university, we
Mm,
know the same people. And then it's almost like, he was talking about, Cassandra, and the Oracle at Delphi. And I said, it's really strange that you're mentioning that because on my office door, I have a very small picture of Cassandra as the Oracle of Delphi, because professionally I would warn people about things were coming and they would ignore me and it'd bite them in the butt. So as a joke, I had a little picture taped on my door. Like all these weird synchronicities between Matt and I. So yeah, his book is fascinating. I highly recommend it to anybody looking at a kind of a interesting optic on high
right
strangeness.
on. I'd like to go over a few things from the film that you highlighted,
Mm,
starting with the radiation factor that sometimes
yes.
shows up and pretty strong at times, I understand.
Yeah, the radiation, it's not only just, the meadow, but it seems to be a kind of a common occurrence in other places. I talked to Eric Bard a little bit about that, and he says that's something that they're seeing as a signature indicator, at Skinwalker Ranch. And it certainly is the case at our place. We have had radiation encounters during one of my incidences where I personally had extreme disorientation, very bad disorientation, is we had a occurrence of a 0.33 microsievert per hour radiation spike, which is not dangerously high, but it was significant, over the baseline. Another incident, and this gets a little weird, is we were in the meadow doing a CE5 protocol, and we left once again. Bob Wilson was back at base camp, and he heard a craft or a vessel of some sort come down the road adjacent to base camp, and he could hear the crunch. He said it sounded like the crunching of gravel, but he couldn't see anything. So I'm not going to call it a car. I don't know what it was. And when that occurred, he looked at his Geiger counter, and he had a 0.66 microsieverts per hour spike of radiation. Now, we were able to go back before he passed away and do a hypnotic regression. We have a psychotherapist now on our staff with ASOG, and we were able to regress him back to that night. And what he recounts in his mind, he remembers a Jeep. Now, remember, he said he didn't see
Yeah.
anything, but he remembers a Jeep. And this Jeep was piloted by two shadow people,
Oh,
completely black heads, black arms, black everything, that got out of the Jeep, meandered around, got in and left. And talking to the psychotherapist, he and I believe that Jeep might have been a screen
mm-hmm.
memory,
Mm,
or his mind, either a implanted screen memory or his mind trying to deal with a very traumatic situation and paint kind of a more understandable picture on it. So, oh, it was a Jeep. But, when he was interviewed after it, visually, he didn't see anything. And unfortunately, Bob passed away before we were able to dig any deeper into that event. But it's strange that he had these strange all black figures at the same time he had this radiation spike. So,
That's so interesting.
and we've done experiments with dowsing rods. We will go to the meadow with a set of dowsing rods and start asking, binary questions, yes or no. And one of the things, we had a Geiger counter and said, can you make this instrument read 0.13? It's very kind of an odd number. And actually, the Geiger counter went up to 0.13 and held there.
Wow. That's so
So,
interesting.
in my opinion, I'm not going to, make anybody else's mind up for them. That's up to them. But in my opinion, we are actually interacting with a non-human intelligence. And where it starts to get really interesting is, like I said, I've reached out to different analysts now. And one of the top photo analysts for MUFON, Seth Feinstein, has actually used some quantum analysis and looked at some of the footage from the film, especially the slinker video. And you probably
Yeah.
remember that low slinking thing. And on his analysis of some of the still frames from that, he says that there is still a black cube
Oh, wow.
there embedded in the quantum state of the imagery. And it's exactly where the cube was in that February 2017 evening. So what it looks like to me is the cube is always there in a quantum state. Now you go back and you look at other anecdotal and other reports of portals forming, things coming out of the portal, creatures. That really lined up with what we encountered that night, with Tony Merkel and his team in November of last year.
You mentioned making contact with an intelligence. In the film, you were doing an experiment, and I forget the exact name of it, where the gentleman wore the headphones. You were asking questions. He couldn't hear what you were
Right.
asking, but
Right.
EVP, I believe, was coming through the headphones, and it was pretty
Yeah.
profound, the answers
Yeah.
that he was relaying to you.
Yeah, that's the Estes
Right,
protocol.
okay.
And what you do on that is take a standard, we use an SB7, you can use an SB11 ghost box, and it just, goes to all the radio bands and randomly. And the person we call the receiver that has on he has on a set of earbuds, job site earbuds that cancel sound, then with shooting muffs over that, and he's blindfolded. And his instructions are, if you hear an intelligible word in that static, just repeat it. If you hear rutabaga, as stupid as that sounds, just verbally say
Yep.
rutabaga. And I was the interrogator, and Daryl Neese, my friend, was the receiver. And it appears to me, and once again, that's for people to make up their minds, that we were engaged in a two-way communication. And what gets really interesting about that communication is when I start questioning the NHI, about specific phenomenologies, especially plasma and gravity, which there's some thought that plasma and gravity could be some of the forms of singularities, microsingularities. It becomes very agitated,
Yeah.
like it does not want to go down that route of questioning. It wants us to stop and go away. So, I thought that was very profound. And every time I present that, and I ask the audience, do you think that, we were in communication with something else? Almost everybody raises their hand and says, yes, it appears that, you were in a meaningful two-way dialogue with a non-human intelligence.
Is that something that you've done often, that particular experiment?
Yeah, we do it from time to time. It was really profound that evening. And, we've had some pretty good, responses on other experiments. I think in my first book, I have another transcript of another session we did, which was pretty good. It was pretty profound. But we're really excited, and this is yielding amazing results, is the God helmet.
Yes.
It's groundbreaking what we're coming up with the God helmet.
I highly recommend everyone check out this short documentary, Helm and Lens, which is about this very particular thing. But please tell us about this experiment, because it's not just the God helmet. There is video technology being used to render images along with it.
Yeah, and I'll start off basically with the God helmet. It was developed by Stanley Coren and Michael Persinger in Laurelian University in Canada, and the idea was the theory was if you stimulate certain parts of the brain, can you recreate mystic experiences, much like people who have had a religious epiphany? Can we recreate that in the lab? And so they started experimenting specifically with the electromagnetic stimulation of the left amygdala. And there's a whole lot of scientific theory. I can really drill down on that, but that's probably a little much. But basically, you're stimulating parts of the brain with electromagnetism, with electromagnetic coils, to recreate a mystic experience. And some researchers, myself included, uh, believe that perhaps you're not artificially creating a mystic experience, but you're tuning the brain to receive mystic experiences that are already
Yeah.
there. And one of my theories is that using the God helmet, you can prime the pump for encounters for high strangeness. And what we have found is people that have a God helmet session, not only are they primed for high strangeness events, the people around them are also tuned. It would kind of like if you imagine a crowd of people and Joe comes over and talks to me and says, "Hey, I'm Joe. I'd like to introduce myself." And we talk a little bit. Then Joe goes back over to his group of friends. Now I feel more comfortable approaching others in that groups of friends because I know somebody there. And we surmise that it's the same thing with this God helmet experiment. It was once somebody uses the God helmet and they step foot into that other realm, the otherness is whatever is out there is maybe more likely to encounter and interact with other people in our group that have not gone through the God helmet experience. So that's basically, the God helmet. And what we did last November is we had one of our team members uh, go through a God helmet session. And what we have found is when we started doing the God helmet, the sessions were very kind of benign. And Sean talks about that in the documentaries. He says, the first time I went through it, I was kind of, relaxed and calm and, felt kind of good, not really meaningful. The second time he went, or several times later he went through it, he had very distinct visions. He had visions of entities around them trying to interact with him. He had visions of a long hallway with a black cube, at the end of the hallway. And so Ward Heine, the director for the Meadow Project, recorded this, and it didn't quite make it in the film. We just didn't have the room for it. And you're a filmmaker, you know how that goes.
Yeah.
Sometimes really good stuff ends up on the cutting room floor. And so he's like, "This is just too cool. We need to do something with." So we made a documentary, and we added a little twist to this documentary. Is we reached out to I was put in contact with Stephen Leah, who is the developer and owner of Hidden Worlds Quantum Imagery, and people might have seen him on Blind Frog Ranch, Skinwalker Ranch, and a lot of the other
Yep.
shows. And his theory is that there is data quantumly entangled in still imagery and video imagery that can be extracted using a proprietary process that Hidden Worlds uses. And he graciously agreed to work with us on this project. And so he started pulling data out of still imagery. Now, remember, this was double blind. He had no idea what Sean's experience was. Sean had no idea Stephen was even working on this. So, it was totally independent. And Stephen started pulling out this information. And I remember him saying, "What is going on with the left side of this guy's head?" He goes, "I don't understand it. There's like this energy that I'm pulling out, from the quantum layers. Uh, all you're doing is, measuring his brain activity, right?" And I said, "No, we're pumping electromagnetic fields into his left amygdala." And the first thing he said is, "Oh my God, was he aware of this?" And it's like, yes, he was a volunteer and he's fine now. He's not barking at cars or anything. He's perfectly fine. And so he goes, "And now I'm seeing like a toroidal field around his face, like
Yeah.
energy is coming in and being expelled." And then he says, coming out of his right side, he goes, "It's really weird. I'm picking up these boxes, these cubes, and inside of these cubes are faces of entities."
So wild.
And, when we, did the debrief with him, was like, right over the area where the cubes were forming over, Sean's right shoulder was basically the entrance, the trail to the meadow. And the faces that you were seeing coincide exactly with the entities that that he was describing. And some of the other analysis that Stephen has been so kind to do for us shows that these entities that present themselves as malofacial constructs, i.e., faces, are all over the meadow.
Now, these faces were appearing to the gentleman that was using the God helmet at the time in his mind's eye, basically.
Right. And they also appeared when they started pulling quantum data out of the still imagery. Wild. So basically, both experiences validated the other. And the cool thing is now that, I've got Seth, finding, cube-like structures in the quantum lattice work of the still imagery of experiences we've had at the Meadow. I've had these, these entities, these faces appearing. And I'm proud to say, and I'm happy to say, our last 9 years of research have been validated. So which is very exciting and very fulfilling for me.
Awesome, man! It is so wild. I highly recommend everyone going check that out because it really doesn't do much justice unless you see the imagery. Speaking of wild, let's get to some of the more wild occurrences that have happened at the Meadow. You mentioned in the beginning that one of your team members basically morphed into a ball of light and was transported.
Yes, that was really crazy. That was the first time we went out there in 2017. I think it was January of 2017, and his goal. Let me back up. The way we set it up is we had multiple teams around the meadow equipped with thermals and night vision. We were going to have a single individual move across the top of the ridge to the south, see if anything could be flushed down into the meadow, or if he could see anything from his higher vantage point. And when we go out, we have a tactical plan, and I don't mean tactical with guns and stuff, but a tactical how we're actually going to operate in the field. And we all understood exactly what we were going to do. And so Bob, once again, was going to be the ridge runner. And he got about halfway to his kickoff point and said, wait, I left a piece of gear back at camp. I'm going to walk back and get it. We're in radio contact. And I'll let you know when I get to the ridge and I'm ready to start. Okay, cool. So Bob, heads back to camp. We don't hear from him. And then the next thing we hear is him come on the radio and said, I'm at the tree across the trail, and people will see that actual tree in the film. I'm at the tree across the trail, and I don't know how I got here. And we're thinking maybe he had like a medical event. So, our medic gets on the radio and starts questioning him. And, he's like, no, I feel fine. I don't, my head doesn't hurt. I'm not dizzy. And so we're like, oh, well, maybe he just was daydreaming and forgot about it. We like to rationalize things. That's one thing that we as humans do amazingly is we can rationalize the strange to make it appear normal when it's anything but. So he gets up on top of the ridge. He moves across the top of the ridge, drops down to the west side, and he's working across. And I have two individuals on one of my listening post observation posts, LPOPs, see him. They see his light, his headlight. They see him on thermal. And these two individuals give you a little bit of background about them. One has a dual bachelor's degrees in philosophy and physics from Georgia Tech. Worked as a researcher for General Motors using AI-enhanced transportation modes. Was a former special operator with the 75th Ranger Regiment. The other guy has a bachelor's degree in management from Georgia Tech and a degree in public administration, master's degree in public administration, and was a career person in emergency response, first responder stuff. Very solid dudes, very solid dudes. And they're looking and they see Bob's headlamp. Then all of a sudden, that headlamp is replaced by a sphere of red energy, like a plasma. And you can go back and, read some of Dr. Simeon Hines stuff talking
Yeah.
about, plasma energy or exotic vacuum objects. That's what it appeared at. And it moved at a very high rate of speed across the field, about 100 meters, then winked out. And they quickly brought their thermal up and they see standing there the figure of a man, the heat signature of a man. And they get on their radio and they say, Bob, are you okay? And as they're watching this heat signature, they see it bring its radio up to its mouth, key it, and say, yeah, I'm fine. Why? It's like, are you sure you're okay? Yes, we're fine. And you can, in the film, you'll hear Daryl Neese, one of the people actually talk about this. He's interviewed. And, hey, come over to us. We need to talk. Says, hey, dude, we just saw you turn into a ball of energy. And he's like, no, I just walked over here. No, we saw you turn into and run. And he's like, I don't run. I'm too old to run.
Yeah.
And, so we argued back and forth, as a team for about a year and a half on that. And what actually happened is it appeared that there were two realities existing at the same time in the meadow. One reality where Bob, just regular dude, just walked through the meadow at a normal pace, nothing different. And another reality where he appeared to turn into a ball of energy and move at a high rate of speed, as witnessed by others. And you can start getting into some of the quantum stuff like observer effects and all of that. And so you have to ask yourself, are we seeing quantum events, quantum experiences actually happening at a macro scale in not only this place of high strangeness, but perhaps in other places of high strangeness around the world?
Yeah.
So that was our very first time at the Meadow. And so it kind of set the stage, for bigger and better things. And, quite frankly, we've had much bigger and better things after that.
Yeah, something else you said towards the beginning, that one of your team members, I'm not sure if it's after they left the Meadow or if this occurred on the Meadow, that they slipped into a different realm or dimension that you called the Upside Down. Yeah. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that was really, really unexpected. And I hate to say it, that we were not really prepared for that. That's bad on us, because we really try to, make sure that we can respond as well as we can to any contingency. But there's another site in Georgia, not the Meadow. This is another site. And over the past few years, we've had a lot of things there. And there's another group that is kind of a parallel group called Seekers, Southeast Cryptid Research Society, that has a lot of the same team members as ASOG and Seekers. And Seekers had gone down there with a bunch of the ASOG members, and we were researching for the past few years, and we've seen cryptids. Except these cryptids aren't like what you would think. Their heat signatures are only a few degrees above the ambient temperature of the environment. So it's almost like they're cloaked. You can see them, but they're just barely visible through thermal. So it makes me think that maybe they're not completely manifested into this reality, that they're kind of right on the periphery of it. So that's kind of the background. So we've seen shadows run across the road. We've smelled them. We've heard them moving in the woods. So it's a big cryptid, very cryptid-rich environment. So in June, just last June, we decided we would go back there and do a expedition. So our plan for that night was there's a place we call Ambush Alley, because there's a place where there's a road that's cut kind of deep into a hillside, and you have high ground on one side and kind of lower on the other. And it would be a good place for an ambush. We call it Ambush Alley. So the idea is we were going to have teams about a quarter of a mile apart, and we were just going to go in, set up with our equipment, and see what happened. And we kind of focused on an area that has had a lot of activity. So the team that was set up at Ambush Alley was Sean and Jamie. Now, Jamie, bless her heart, that's what we say in Southernese when we kind of pity somebody, is, bless their heart. Jamie, bless her heart, this was her first outing. She was interested in Bigfoot, so she wanted to go out and Seekers is a entry-level group that brings people in and that want to experience this stuff. So she was with Sean, God Helmet Sean, who is a very experienced researcher, retired law enforcement officer, former Marine, really squared away guy. So we're sitting there and we're all set up in our different, little areas. And Sean comes on the radio and he says, "We have activity. They're all around us." And it's like, "Oh, okay, cool." He's got stuff going on. And we figured, a quarter of a mile, we can, on foot, you can't get there immediately, but, relatively quick. And then the next thing is Sean comes on the radio and says, "I don't know what's happening." And then the team leader that night gets on the radio and says, "Are you okay?" And he says, "I don't know." So immediately teams start vectoring into his location. Now remember, we're a quarter of a mile. The closest team is a quarter of a mile away. We were about half a mile away. So we quickly load up our gear and we are hoofing it just as fast as we can to get to Sean. The first team that gets to him was made up of two individuals, Kristen and Tony. Now, Jamie was disoriented and Sean was disoriented. And Jamie's first word to Tony, she reaches out, she touches him. She says, "Are you real? Are you real?" And he says, "Yes, I'm real." And she feels him. And once she starts getting that tactile sense of another human being, she starts to become more grounded. So during the after action review, what they described is they were sitting there and they started hearing things going on around them, things moving around them. And then they said that the environment changed. Now remember, this is after Sean had gone through the God helmet the previous November that you saw in Hillman Lens. So they said that the environment changed. It's like this fog came in and trees that were there before were no longer there. They were somewhere else. And Jamie described it as being in somewhere much like the Upside Down in Stranger Things. And they actually were places on Jamie's phone that has a tracking mechanism on it that they don't remember going to. Like there was an open field that it showed them going into this open field. They don't recall being there.
Wow.
And it got so disoriented that they actually reached out and held hands because they thought they weren't going to come back.
Wow.
And what's even stranger is the 40 minutes of missing time.
40 minutes.
Yeah.
How long did they perceive that they were lost in this?
They don't really recall. They just, it was such an intense experience. And so we got there. Finally, all the teams, converged. And these two solid, rational, reasonable people were visibly upset. Very, very visibly upset. Had gone through something very traumatic. So it's on our slate, sometime in the future, put them through hypnotic regression and see what we can pull out of that. But, that's the curveball that the Meadow throws you is, we're doing this God helmet stuff where we're reaching out there, we're telling the phenomena or the NHI or the other or whatever you want to call it, "Hey, we're here. We'd like to talk." And now, regardless of where people are, they're having these experiences. It's almost like distance doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're in the Meadow or somewhere else. If this thing wants to reach out and touch you, it can. And, you can look at that two ways. You can really be terrified by that, or you can be comforted by that. And that's kind of an existential thing, how you take that. And, it goes back to what, I said earlier before the show is I'm kind of now saying we are not alone, comma, we are never alone.
Yeah.
This phenomena is always there. It's always around you, based on, what I've seen, from the quantum image analysis at the Meadow and through our God helmet session, that these things are continuously around us. And, Some of them want to talk to you and make contact. Some of them don't know what their purpose is. I really don't know. Are they benign? Are they, malevolent?
Yeah, I'd like to get into
It's
some of
hard
the
to.
implications in a bit. First, I'd like to hear more about the team members being followed with the phenomena. You did feature a story, a young lady that claimed she
Mm,
had orbs and then felt something touch her,
oh,
which is pretty terrifying.
yes, that's Kristen.
Yeah.
And she was actually the thermal operator that recorded the famous portal footage. That's her footage, off of her
Hmm.
thermal. Very talented young lady, emergency room nurse, you know, science-based person, really solid individual. Right after the portal incident, she started having dreams of orbs coming into her room. Okay. And as these dreams progressed, she started recalling things like entities standing at the foot of her bed and pulling her. And so bad that one night she actually chipped a tooth
Oh, wow. Yeah.
fighting with these things. And she just vaguely, initially just vaguely remembered this stuff. And then under hypnotic regression, and I've got the whole transcript in my second book, uh, during hypnotic regression, she remembers now this entity standing over her, almost like a witch or an old crone. Now, which is interesting because you go back to the old crone archetype in cultures all over the world. The old crone is very, very special. You can go back to the Spearfinger Witch of the Cherokees, the old crone of Gaelic. The witch-like motif is very, very powerful throughout these cultures. And she remembers that entity standing above her while these other entities were grabbing her arms and legs. So, you kind of parse all of that out. What does that sound like? Well, that sounds like something that John Mack and Bud Hopkins write about in their various accounts of the abduction phenomena. Now, am I saying she's abducted? I don't know. But it's what it sounds like. So that's the kind of stuff that the Meadow Project or whatever it is in the Meadow is now following people home. My personal experience, 40 meters from where I'm sitting right now, I was outside I have 8 acres. I was out cruising around 40 acres from, or 40 meters from my little cabin here. And I found a set of footprints, canine footprints, except that these footprints were 6 inches in diameter.
Wow.
They were huge. They were about that
Wow.
big. And they started in a distinct place, went for a distance that looked bipedal, and then disappeared. Now you go and you start looking at some history of this kind of stuff. There's a very rich history of lycanthropes, werewolves, throughout medieval Europe and all of that. You come over here into the 20th first century. Uh, People that were investigating Skinwalker Ranch under the auspices of Robert Bigelow and the National Institute for Discovery Science. One of the individuals, I think his name was Axelrod, when he got done and went back to his suburban Virginia home, his family started seeing large upright canines in their backyard. You go to Marley Woods and you start talking to some of the stuff with Tom Fierro and Ted Phillips. There are accounts of large upright canines in that area. So there's something about these dogmen and high strangeness or people that encounter high strangeness. So, if you think the meadow phenomena is somehow held only in the meadow, you're really kidding yourself because it will follow you around. And once you think you have it figured out, and once you think you know all of its modalities, it's going to throw you a curveball,
Mm.
like taking you to the upside down in a place in Georgia that traditionally doesn't have that kind of
Right.
stuff.
If all that isn't concerning enough, they have actually had some deaths occur
Yeah,
from a couple of your team members.
yeah,
There's no definite proof that the meadow may have been the cause of it in any way, but it is very interesting that they were the ones that entered the portal, right?
yeah, right. That was the two people that have passed away are Bob Wilson and Tim Gillardin, and they were four people entered into the portal. Two of those people are dead.
Wow.
You're looking at one of the four. I'm obviously still
Mm-hmm.
alive, and Daryl Neese is the other one. And can I say correlation is causality? No, I would be a fool to say that. But it is interesting that there are now documented correlations between encounters with high strangeness in very real physical manifestations. That's another chapter in my second book as I explore this stuff, reading some of the stuff that, Dr. Gary Nolan talks about and others, and how, these encounters with extreme high strangeness results in, physical ailments. One of the most famous cases, of course, is the Cash Landrum case, in Texas. So, how this possibly could be non-ionizing radiation, what are the modalities of this? And it seems like a lot of people that have these encounters do start having uh, misunderstood and, not understood health ailments, later on in their lives.
You also said that many of the team members were having disturbing dreams. Did you experience this as well?
Not so much. I'm a lucid dreamer. It's kind of funny. My wife teases me about that. As I dream, and I actually, had this whole story, and I can
Oh,
tell you
wow.
about everything that happened in the morning. But probably the most profound, disturbing dreams was, of course, Kristen. In the orbs coming into her rooms, and then we look at that in retrospect, through the optics of hypnotic regression, and they don't appear to be dreams.
Yeah.
So you always wonder, what about the rest of the team members that maybe don't recall these experiences? Nevertheless, the experiences are still there. So, like I said, that's why we have a psychotherapist with training on hypnotic regression on our staff, so we can, we have that tool, in our toolbox, and B, if somebody encounters something very, very strange and they're starting to suffer, what we think is an onset of a post-traumatic stress syndrome, uh, that we can, actually go and provide, post-crisis, counseling and stuff like
Hmm.
that.
I'd like to explore the possible implications of this a bit. I find it interesting that quite a few traditional nuts and bolts UFO researchers are now looking at the phenomenon much differently,
Yeah.
even bringing in theological implications into
Yeah.
this. Many people believe that what we're dealing with may be a negative demonic force that can influence and have, like you were saying, physical effects on us. Although many people have very positive experiences, if you look at the fact that this phenomena can shift into whatever it wants and appear as whatever it wants, and there has been deception noted in the past by these
Mhm.
entities appearing as something positive and not ending up being that. So to me, I have to question all of it, but I'd love to get your thoughts into the possible, maybe theological implications.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. On the one side of the demonic thing is, I don't know if you've ever heard of the Collins
Yeah.
elite.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so that's one theory, that these are actually demonic
Hmm.
manifestations and should be treated as such. The other side of it is these are angelic apparitions and experiences, and the best probably example of that is Chris
Right.
Bledsoe. Looks at this as very positive, very
Hmm.
enlightening. And then you have people like me, kind of in the middle, that go, well, I don't know. I have my own religious optics that I look at things through. So I have to understand that that is, that's there, preconception is already there, that exists in my own understanding of it. But here's how I kind of look at it is, if you read the Bible, and if you're of that, vein, it talks about the fruits of the Spirit, that things of God will have fruits of the Spirit that reflect God. They'll be kind, they'll be loving, they'll be helpful, things like that. They say to look at that in people. So to me, the other side of that coin is things that were demonic of the devil, i.e., Satan, Lucifer, whatever, would have negative things. And I think you have to take it as it comes. Everything I've encountered, with the Meadow Project and its ancillary tentacles as it, goes out, nothing has been, in my opinion, evil or gave the appearance of being evil. And I'm very careful, and I tell people, be very, very wary of always labeling something you don't understand as evil, because that's a dangerous road to go down. And an analogy I use is this: you're walking through the forest and you come up to a cabin in the forest, and you knock on the door of the cabin, and a voice says, "Who's there?" And it's like, "Hey, I'm Chris, or I'm Trey. I'm walking through here, and your cabin looks really cool. I was wondering if you'd like to talk for a moment." And the voice on the other side of the door says, "Yes, that sounds great." I said, "Well, we can sit out here on the porch." And the voice says, "I'm not really comfortable with opening up the door. Can we talk through the door?" "Yeah, that's cool." And you sit there and you have a conversation. Now, you really don't know what's on the other side of that door.
Right.
We're preconditioned to assume it's human, but we really don't know. So if we don't know what's on the other side of the door, should we automatically assume it's evil because we don't understand it? To me, that just seems stupid and very arrogant. So that's kind of the way I look at these things, is until it presents itself as evil or interacts as evil, I'm not going to label it as evil. So so I'm kind of neutral on that. I don't take the angelic, approach. I don't take the demonic approach. I just take it as it comes.
Right on. One thing that seems to be becoming more and more clear is, at the least, there is much more to our reality than we could understand, and possibly an entire realm or ecosystem of intelligences that we just can't normally perceive, but is always there.
Right, absolutely. That's what's really becoming apparent in our research, is these things are always around us, and you can start to see them, by extracting quantum data, out of imagery and things like that. The theory is that in a quantum state, everything that is, was, or will be does exist in a quantum state. That includes other realms, our realm. That's how we do remote viewing, things like that. So I think that's becoming more and more apparent. I think that, we have to realize that these things are always around us, kind of like Santa Claus, always watching you. So, don't be naughty. And, what do we do with that information? Do we find that terrifying, or do we find that comforting? Well, I, for one, find it comforting, because if I look at it through that optic, that, I am not just merely a brain driving a meat suit, through the universe, and when this meat suit dies, that's it. Now, there's another realm. Human beings are multidimensional creatures. Our brain is not that squishy thing inside of our head. That's part of it. That's a three-dimensional shadow or representation of a multidimensional organ, which is our brain. And our brain, our real brain, exists in multiple dimensions. And I think that can be borne out through scientific study. And so that means what we perceive here is not it. We're like the prisoner in the analogy of Plato's cave. When the chains are released and we come out of that cave, we're going to see a very bright and wonderful world. It's going to be well beyond what we perceive. And I find comfort in that. And that makes me glad.
Whenever you approach some of these high strangeness areas that very profound phenomena has manifested there, like portals, and people have seemingly entered into different, what you can only describe as dimensions at this point. Looking at that, do you approach this with the possibility that maybe one of you might disappear forever with one of these experiences, like a missing 411 experience?
Yeah, that's why we always take a couple of shots of bourbon before we go out. No, I'm kidding. That's a very poignant point, and it kind of goes into something I always tell people. If you are going to get into this business seriously, and I'm not talking about, going out in the woods with some of your buddies with a voice recorder, and I'm talking about really seriously, and there's a lot of people that think they want to get into this. is it can be dangerous, and you've got to be okay with that, and your family has to be okay with that. Uh, David Paulides has stacks of files of people that went out and never came back. My own experience of extreme disorientation, if I hadn't had a team member with me, I might have ended up as a chapter in one of David Paulides' books. Jamie and Sean, if that hadn't have gone the way it did, they might not have come back because it appears to me that they were somewhere else. So that's always a possibility. Now, is this other place that people would go to? Is it somewhere really cool, and kind of groovy, or is it somewhere kind of horrifying? I don't know. But you never know. Every time you step foot out your front door, you're taking a chance. And all it takes is a head-on collision for you to quite literally enter into a different realm, the realm of death. That's true. So, you can go through your research life or your life in general, fearing that, or you can just take things as they come and be happy for the time, the people, and the experiences we're given.
Right on. Well, Trey, this was fascinating. I highly recommend everyone going check out the films. Before we let you go, is there anything upcoming that you'd like to let us know about?
Yeah, let me preface that. I'm going to kind of, the film, you can find that at merkelfilms.com. My 2 books you can find on Amazon. I always recommend that people want the full Meadow experience. Get the books, read the books, and see the film. Helm and the Lens, as you said, fascinating, groundbreaking research. I'm very proud to be part of that. What's upcoming is I am going to be speaking at the Colorado MUFON meeting in March. In not Colorado, Arizona.
Oh, I was
Phoenix.
excited. I was like, I could go see that one.
I'll be in Phoenix in March. We'll be screening the film and doing Q&A afterwards, so that should be pretty cool. I might be speaking somewhere in July. I'm not at liberty to say where, but it's somewhere pretty cool. If that works out, I had somebody from a board of directors of a very well-known organization sit in on one of my lectures. I wasn't aware they were there, and I was kind of being screened.
Nice.
So hopefully that will come to fruition. I will be in May at the Contact Modalities Expo in Wisconsin. And then I'm waiting to see what shakes out for the rest of the summer. So I'm going to be all around, doing stuff. Understand that I might have a cameo in an upcoming film. Maybe more coming up on that. So I've got another film that I was working on a couple of weeks ago, which is Cryptic Encounters Making Contact, that I was actually out with Adam Davies, Martin Groves, and some other in the Land Between the Lakes. Had some crazy stuff go on there. We actually did some God Helmet stuff and with some amazing stuff. So that film hopefully will be coming out maybe in about 9 months. So just a lot going on, just really busy. You can go and find me at TreyHudsonResearch.com. I try to update that webpage, try to keep it current. And always you can find me at Trey Hudson-author on Facebook.
Excellent, Trey. Thank you so much. I'll have the links easily accessible for everyone, and we'll definitely have to do this again. Until next time, everyone, have a wonderful evening. We will talk again tomorrow. See y'all then. Are you and your family prepared for an emergency? Maybe the fake alien invasion? Now is the time to prepare yourself and your family for any event. Check out Prep Starts Now. Their mission is to provide high-quality preparedness products that empower individuals and families to be ready for any situation. They're committed to delivering reliable, trusted gear to ensure your safety, security, and peace of mind in times of need. Their product selection is carefully curated to provide you with the essential gear you need to stay prepared. From emergency kits to tactical tools, every item is chosen for its reliability and practicality. Prep Starts Now understands the importance of family, and their goal is to equip you with everything you need to build a solid plan for your family's preparedness. In today's ever-changing world, being prepared is more important than ever. And Prep Starts Now is here to help you and your family stay ready with quality products and practical guidance. Use the link in the description and get 15% off your order.